Hello and welcome back to another episode of League Talk, the podcast all about management, coaching, performance and all things League of Legends. My name is AJ and on today's podcast we have Counter Logic Gaming's Director of Esports, Trinitiii. So Trinitiii, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you giving up your busy schedule, especially with all of the flying you've been doing to and fro from Detroit, where the matches you guys were playing for third and fourth place with CLG. So why don't you give us a little introduction about you, and thank you for your time again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me on and being able to speak. My name is Matt. I'm the Director of Esports here at CLG. I also go by Trinitiii. My background is mainly in traditional sports and clinical psychology. I'm a master's in clinical psychology. I was a therapist, or should say, acting as a therapist for about 6 years, working with different clients, from families to children to adults, addiction, all that good stuff. And then also too, I also have my background in traditional sports. I've always been a competitive person, an athlete, and got to play through college. And then I was a co-commissioner of the Southern California Collegiate Volleyball League for about 6 years as well. And so, fortunately, when I was looking around for probably about a year or two prior to me getting to esports, I really just held out till I found the role that I felt really fit me. And fortunately, at that time, I found this role opening, to which CLG had never had this position before, and got to interview with Devin Nash and Hotshot GG at the time. And really, they were looking for somebody that could understand and team building and how to manage people. And so, with my background in traditional sports and clinical psychology, they felt I was a really good fit, and as did I. And it just, we've done a lot of good stuff since. And so excited to be here at CLG. And it's vastly different than when I first started back in 2016. Here we are, and a lot of the fruit of the labor being put in behind the scenes is starting to come to fruition here. So it's an exciting time for us.
Amazing. So you must have been there for about 3 years then, if you joined in, you said
Yep.
2016, right? Amazing. And
Yeah, I think it's 3 years this month or next month. Yep.
oh wow. Well, congratulations for your anniversary.
Thanks.
So you said before getting into esports, you said you were traditional sports for a long time, obviously with volleyball
Yep.
and things like that. What was the thing that sort of got you into esports? Normally there was this like sort of eureka moment where people realized like, oh, esports is really where I want to go to. So was there one of those for you?
So it wasn't so much that actually. So I'd been playing games my entire life. My dad owned a video game developing company, and so I've always been around gaming, or video games rather. Definitely on the publisher developer side, and kind of understood all the ins and outs of it and the lack of glamour that actually exists behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so I actually didn't want anything to do with it, funny enough. And then it was really, post college, post grad school, when I'm, was doing therapy full time, and just really had this itch to continue to compete. And because it was the first time in my stage of life since I was 4 years old that I was not playing sports, and gaming was just always there. I was watching esports on the weekends, and I just really, need the outlet to compete. And so decided to look into esports to kind of fulfill that inner desire that I had, and seeking that outlet that I knew I just kind of needed in some form of capacity. And so I was looking into it, and I've been able to fulfill that, obviously, through building teams and working with the guys, and our girls as well, so that way we could go out and compete at a really high level. And so I feel like this role really is very fulfilling in a lot of ways, and I still get to use a lot of my background and things I went to school with, and it just looks very different than how I originally intended it
I
to
can
be.
imagine. Yeah, absolutely. Because I very rarely do people go. My experience is I've been a traditional sports coach for 10 odd years now, 9, 10 years. And I basically got into video games through just my friends, and then it was like there was that moment for me that I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to get into.
Yeah.
You know? So it's interesting to hear that side of the story as well, especially with your dad. What video games were you playing when you were a kid? What sort of console would that have been as well?
For me, I go back to NES, Sega Saturn days. Sonic
Nice.
on Sega was fun, and then transitioned to more I would say Battlefield 1942 and Warcraft 3 were my jam for a while.
Nice.
Yeah,
Very
and then put a lot of time into that. And then high school and college happened, and then went from Heroes of New Earth to League, and so
Nice. So you played a bit of League as
now
well.
I just have to play everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just because I have to know what's going on, so I
Yeah,
don't
of
actually get to
course.
play anything specific. So I'm always dabbling in a lot of games,
Yeah.
just because the job requires it
Of
to.
course. Because that's one thing that really interests me, yeah? And a lot of the time, for people who aren't necessarily very familiar with the business world, or more not so familiar with the esports world, and when you combine those sort of things, it comes a lot of confusion, you know? And one of the things that some people don't understand, and myself included in one of this, is sort of how you would describe the job that you do, and what does it entail? Because there's so many different sort of high-end business level sort of jargon that can be in there that can be quite confusing. So for those who haven't heard of your role or don't necessarily understand what it entails, how would you describe that?
It's a really good question. So it's gone through a lot of evolutions over the past 3 years. We've had an acquisition from Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
We've had uh, different executive leadership groups come in and out. And so through that, there's been a lot of changes, I guess you could say. So I think probably the best way to answer this is where it's currently at.
Yeah.
I would say in the past anywhere from like 4 to 9 months, it's been changing in a positive direction, and I think our fans are beginning to see the output of a lot of the changes that we've been doing internally, but we just haven't talked about it. But really, right now, it's overseeing the coaching and the infrastructure internally within the department. So everything from the new hires that we're making, what systems we want in place for different games, and what are we looking to achieve in these different titles. And then I've been working more directly with the executive team and MSG specifically around our direction that we're headed in terms of games and titles that we want to be exploring and why we want to do that, which was kind of happening before, but not to the extent that I think that it could have been. And so again, like I think we're making a lot of sound decisions as a group. And again, I think 2019 has been very exciting for us as a company because our female CS:GO team has made it to 4 finals.
Wow.
Went 4 out of 4 for finals internationally. The league team obviously is having its success. Our Smash players are crushing it as they do. Fortnite, we got a second place finish with Psalm at the World Cup. We had 2 players over the weekend qualify for the Fortnite Championship Series. So there's a lot of exciting things happening competitively, and I think a lot of it stems from the great staff that we have here, and also to, like I said, we're really reevaluating some things, and so the new systems in place that we've put together, I think, are really yielding these results for us. So it's exciting times.
Well, yeah, for sure. Congratulations. I didn't realise quite the success. Obviously, this podcast is predominantly based in League of Legends, so I was when I was researching yourself and getting into this sort of stuff, I was finding out about the League of Legends team, the Apex team, CS:GO, Smash, Fortnite, all of these titles that you guys had. But I wasn't as acutely aware as quite how successful all of these teams had been of recent, you know? So, for sure, congratulations on that. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
Because with those, with this job title, you're obviously the director of esports, not director of League of Legends, not director of CS:GO.
Yeah.
So with this job title, there's so many different games that you're involved in, and we've spoken briefly about the success there. But each of these, I presume, is vastly, vastly different to the prior. Being League of Legends has its differences to Apex, has its differences to CS:GO, and so on and so forth. But whilst you talk about the differences, there's surely some veins that have similarities, some core tenets potentially that you invest in. Maybe that's staff, for example, and the infrastructure around the players. But what's it like being involved in these different esports that CLG partakes in? And are there some big tribulations that go across that? Maybe the differences, really do have an effect on the players or something, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, it's exciting and fun because they all have their own unique personalities and their own unique ecosystems. Even the player bases themselves are different too. So it's always interesting, whether it be signing a new player through recruiting or doing a new contract. It's just they have their own uniqueness to them, I guess is the best way to kind of say it. And so it's just really getting embedded into understanding what that looks like and some of the challenges that kind of
Yeah.
comes with it as well. But to kind of answer your question in terms of, how do we kind of handle them and like what are some of the things that we put in place? Infrastructure wise, we want it to look pretty similar across the board. We would
Mm.
like that continuity and consistency for our players in terms of treatment, in terms of what we're able to do to support them. We really want to invest in our players, and I can confidently say that we do that,
Yeah.
and confidently say that we probably do it better than most organizations.
Hmm.
And the reason why I say that is not out of arrogance.
No, no.
It's because a lot of orgs actually copy what we do. I think that's some things that fans don't really know or recognize.
Hmm.
Um, and so, with that being said, of course, on League, our infrastructure is a little bit deeper
Hmm.
because of a variety of reasons. The complexity of the game, the kind of resources that are already naturally being pumped into it, and what it means for our company. But with that being said, it's not vastly different than, let's say, our CS:GO red team. And yeah, just like the way we want to treat them or operate with them is pretty consistent.
Mm. Amazing, because previously to having yourself on the podcast, I spoke to Summer, who was
Hmm.
fantastic, by the way, obviously from CLG, with player development and things like that. That's one of the things that, with my background in traditional sports, it's so common. The people regularly will invest in their talent. And in esports,
Yep.
the people that I've spoken to. I worked in the UK scene for League of Legends, and there isn't much investment into talent. Maybe that's because of
Yep.
being able to pump money into it. I'm not entirely sure. But the infrastructure that you guys have put together is astonishing, right? And the reason I say that is because it has so many parallels to all the wonderful things that I've learned over my time as being a traditional sports coach. And there's
Yep.
two main things that really stand out to me in terms of CLG's infrastructure. And I know that I spoke to you about this previously, that I think is really, really important because it was something that you also had a hand in. So the two things are the performance center
Yep.
and the coaching structure of the League of Legends team. And you said obviously it's a bit deeper when it comes to League of Legends. But we'll start with the performance center because this is one of the few of its kind, right? If I know Team Liquid have something like this in North America, but in terms of your
Hmm.
performance center, it was one of the first, if not the first, that allows players to have their own housing as well as their place to work, which I think is an amazing change that was sort of inevitable in a way, right? And I know you had a strong involvement in the process of this, but would you mind talking me through what some of the things that you were hoping to put together, and what were you looking to do when this project came about, this performance center?
Yeah, so good question. So when I interviewed back in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
it was at the CLG house at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And during my interview, I had brought up, I said, hey, this is cool and all, but do you guys run into these challenges? And I
Yeah.
listed a variety of challenges. And most of them are kind of boundary based, meaning how do you have your bosses living in the same location as you? When are players and when are they off? Like when
Yeah.
is staff on? When is staff off? Like there's a slew of issues, and so um, in the interview they kind of chuckled and they said, yeah, like absolutely. And I had brought up the idea. I said, hey, have you guys ever considered like moving away from this format?
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, but, and then they just, you know, there was a lot of reasons why we couldn't do
Mm-hmm.
it. To which most of them were pretty fair, and I understand. So fast forward to 2017, acquisition with MSG. Again, this topic of a facility revisits itself and begins to manifest into something very real. And MSG was very quick to get on board and understand the value add here and how this is really helpful for both driving esports in a new positive direction, but also to what it was going to do for our players, for our staff, and just really impact the organization as a whole in a very
Mm.
positive way. And so, in terms of my role and what I was looking for out of the facility, I think we accomplished many of them. Uh, I was part of the team that got to go out and visit and look at the different office spaces, and there was many that we were considering. And while we're considering them, it's not just the space itself, but it's actually how do you utilize a space, and then how do we grow with the space over a period of time.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of those discussions, but ultimately, where we landed where we are currently, allows us to fulfill a lot of those needs. Everything from giving players dedicated practice rooms,
Mm.
so that way they have a place to come and practice in separation from work life
Yeah.
and their personal life. Um, we still have Andrew, who's our chef, who's awesome, and he's able to still provide meals for us and cook and operate out of here. And of course, we have our full-time staff, everything from content to the esports department to the business department.
Hmm.
Everybody's here in one location, so that way it's kind of like a one-stop shop for our players. And we just really want to alleviate a lot of the burdens that esports has kind of placed on players within
Yeah.
reason. So everything from content creation to basic dining to
Yeah.
having their staff available to work with them in person. We do have that. And then for our remote teams, this space is always available for them to come to boot camp. If they just happen to be in LA and want to stop by,
Hmm.
doors are always open and available. And the space is literally 24/7. So we are in esports, and sometimes we do work in odd
Yeah.
hours, and we do have that flexibility here too. So yeah, all in all, it's been a very positive experience. Just like anything, of course, there's drawbacks, but I would say by far and away, it's been a huge net positive for the company and our players as a whole.
Yeah, because when I heard it was announced first, I was quite happy for esports to be moving in that direction and to be moving away from the old way of living, in terms of we all have 10 people in some sort of a house or apartment building,
Hmm.
and that, I was happy to hear that that was the way that you guys were going. And we
Yep.
saw on you guys released a video tour of CLG, obviously, and managed to see loads of that and how amazing that looked. But we also saw Dash come by from the
Yep.
analyst desk, and that was a video with you involved as well. So we
Hmm.
managed to see a little bit more about it. But was there any pushback? So whether that was community pushback or maybe internal pushback, when this was announced and when this idea was going through, did you notice that many people were, let's stick to the old, let's stick to what we know, sort of thing? Because obviously, any change is bound to have a level of that. But how much of that was there for you guys?
Personally, I didn't experience it or
Right.
hear of it. If it existed,
Mm.
never made its way to me.
That's good news, I guess.
I think our players, especially on the league side, were excited to embrace it
Mm.
for a variety of reasons. The way that we have our player housing set up, players have the option to go live. They choose,
Mm.
and so we're giving them flexibility and some freedom there. So with that being said, I think players were excited about that because living and working and breathing esports all day, every day, and while fun and exciting, does take its toll.
Mm.
Um, and same thing with our staff. I think they were kind of excited too at the time to begin to embrace that. Like, hey, I actually go to work and then I come home and I can turn off.
Yeah.
Even though many of us, when we come home, we just sit in front of our PCs again, anyways, and
Of
keep
course,
working.
yeah.
But that's a separate discussion. Um, yeah, so I think that ultimately, there wasn't a lot of uh, resistance. I mean, there's a few minor things that came up here and there, but nothing that would indicate that anybody was like bummed about leaving the
Mm.
housing situation.
Yeah, because I guess it allows people to be a bit more independent, and that's something that had always
Yep.
been not much of a case. Everyone's like, oh, well, at the pick a name G2 house, we end up doing all of their
Yep.
laundry for them, or, this sort of stuff. So I guess it's a nice curve to allow people to really become, like, for want of a better term, like functioning human beings, to be able to learn how to pay bills and things like that.
Yep. 100%. So to put my therapist hat on for a second,
Mm.
a lot of players that we're recruiting are in the life stage of young adulthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're 18 to, let's say, 24 is kind of like our
Yeah.
main demographic for our players right now. So traditionally, if you think about somebody in that stage of life, they're typically either going to a workplace or they're in college.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go there, you're learning a lot of life skills and responsibility. And so I think what esports has actually done a really bad job of is there's a lot of hand holding and enabling that happens. And as a result, players are not learning these life skills. And so what we're doing is kind of the opposite, is that we provide the hand holding where appropriate and necessary, but we're also providing a lot of freedom so that way the players can develop.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a moral responsibility that I feel where we shouldn't be doing a disservice to our players even beyond their time here at CLG. and we really want them to be successful moving forward. So whether that be successful on a new team or successful in life and in the workplace, that's something that is important to us. Obviously, winning is important and competing, and so that's always our priority. But when opportunities exist to provide additional value to players, we definitely jump on that. And so to tie this back to the original point here is that if we are doing laundry, if we are catering to our players beyond what we would deem necessary
Sure.
or kind of appropriate, like we're not really helping them. And then that stuff actually does transition to in-game because players are just expecting things and they don't know how to work when things get difficult or hard, right? A good example is this weekend we're down 0-2. It was tough, right? Like our players had to bounce back and they need that resilience. And so these ideas stem further than just basic life. Like we do see them transition to in-game if you're really cognizant and somebody that understands this stuff at a deep level. Like you can pick up on it with players, which is something that I would say our staff is exceptionally strong at. So yeah.
Amazing, because that less handhold, the idea of handholding less was something that was echoed in the podcast I did with Summer, because we spoke a little bit about the work that she does and how she's brought in people who will help them with finance and accounting sort of topics like that, making sure that they know how to deal with money and the reason why I say and I'm so fond of CLG sort of infrastructure and the work that you guys do is because of that. That's unusual. That isn't something that would normally happen in these sort of environments. So it's wonderful to see that you can. Not handhold, but push people in the right direction and help them with that development,
Yeah, exactly. And it's just providing a resource that they wouldn't necessarily know how to tap into, or, showing them, hey, this is something you should be considering. The same is true for getting their housing or apartments. Like many of them have never done it, and some of our players do choose to live on their own. Biofrost, obviously, we did a piece. He bought his own house. So there's players that are in different stages of life that are a little bit more mature than others, or kind of more life skills. And so we just got to meet them where they're at, and everybody's in a different spot, and that's okay.
Of course. Yeah, amazing. The Bifrost house looked beautiful as well. Hopefully that was close, so you didn't have to.
Right.
Yeah, it was amazing. It's nice to see that those sort of things are being done for players as well, because it's not always easy to have people hand-holding but also pushing in the right direction as well. But we spoke about the first thing, which was talking about the performance center, but the other really interesting thing for me that I mentioned was the coaching structure. And the reason the coaching structure is so interesting to me is it sort of mirrors what you would call a head coach in traditional sports, right? And obviously in the UK where I live is you have football or soccer being the main sport, followed up with things like rugby and cricket. And head coaches in these sort of sports don't necessarily coach people how to play football or don't necessarily coach people how to play rugby, So it seemed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you hire Weldon Green, you allow him the infrastructure to employ specialists and others around him that can advance the team and even cover holes for knowledge and gaps in knowledge that he may have as the head coach. And again, this is something new, right? This isn't something that you often see. The head coach is someone that's going to be able to sit down, always do 100% of the VOD reviews. Obviously, I'm sure Weldon takes part in those, but you know where I'm going. And it seems to be one of a kind in esports. I haven't seen that structure anywhere else. So what was the hope and the vision here in hiring Weldon, and what were you hoping for with the team direction through this hiring process?
Yeah, so good question. I was personally very excited for this process because it was my first opportunity on the league side to actually impose the vision that I had. Because the previous staff that was there was one that existed when I got hired. So this was kind of my first shot at, hey, let's build this thing the way that I would like. And so, to your point, Weldon is more of a traditional head coach, which is exactly what I wanted when I came into CLG. One of the first things I was tasked with was I said, go out and evaluate all of our head coaches, to which I reported back and I said, we've got some things to work on. And, and I've said this publicly before. I did this presentation at South by Southwest, and I've even told my coaches this, and so they understand where this is coming from. But I said there really aren't head coaches in esports. I said we assign the title head coach, but I said this is not. I said a traditional head coach exemplifies and has this skill set, and I listed out. And I said this is not disrespect to anybody in the room on my coaches, but I said some are further along in this phase than others, and Weldon is probably like the really only head coach that I've had the opportunity to work with in esports, and that I've probably know of. I'm sure somebody will find somebody else to throw a name out there. And so this isn't to say that nobody else
Does it?
kind of
Sure.
hits these qualities. I just haven't got to work with them.
Mhm.
But yeah, so Weldon, I really wanted a real head coach. I wanted somebody with a vision. I wanted somebody that could execute. I needed a leader, and I needed somebody that could tell people what they should be doing and how it gets done. And didn't want to carry that burden and be in the room every day trying to
Sure.
carry that torch, right? And that's where your head coach should be, because if I'm the one that's doing it, I'm undermining the head coach. And then what's the role of the head coach at the end of the day, right? They're just a strategist.
Yeah.
Which is historically what esports has done. Is you take former pros, you take analysts, or you take somebody that knows the game really well, and you throw them in as a head coach role, and you say, hey, run the ship.
Yeah.
And that works to an extent. Some games it works better than others, but as we know, league has evolved so far that those types I don't think are going to be tremendously successful long term. Some of them do exist and are well known and are finding success, and that's great. And I think they will continue to find that because they have a reputation and they can get away with certain things. Whereas like somebody new entering as a strategist, I think is going to have a harder time. Um, and so what I did was I said, okay, head coach, and then I said I need somebody that understands the game very well. Somebody that can go through picks and bans, somebody that just like understands the strategy. And Weldon and I talked about that, and he agreed. He said, "Yeah." He's like, "I want somebody that can be excellent at picks and bans, and that can just outdraft." And as we all know, like sometimes games are won and lost in picks and bans. And so, with that being said, we went through a very thorough process to find our strategic coach, which ended up being Irene, and it was really obvious that he was the preferred choice for a lot of reasons. Even our players were like, we need to get this guy. And so we went out and we did it. So Irene came on. And so that really shored up like the top of the chain around our coaching staff. We have an analyst who's awesome, who was with us in our previous under our previous coaching regime. And so we kept him as well. And then as many people know, like Tafo worked with us, with me specifically. He's been working with me informally for probably about a year, and then formally was transitioned to the head of analytics and scouting essentially for the department as a whole back in February. So he's been working with our league team since spring split, and he just provides a lot of data points for our coaching staff. Things that maybe they have questions about, whether it be like internationally, or like, hey, what's going on with this particular champ? Like, can you give us some additional insights? But to Daniel's point, he said this before, is like the coaches know about 95%. The other 5% are things they're just kind of either curious about or looking to be challenged on, and that's what he provides to help them out. And then we also have Summer, who's our head of player development, so we tackle that. She works with our players on like out-of-game issues that are kind of plaguing in-game, is the best way to really describe it. And then we have Andrew, who's our chef, and we have our yoga instructor that we contract. We have a massage therapist that we contracted, and sure I'm missing other people, but it's pretty robust. But we're seeing the fruit of the labor, and I think this year, 2019 specifically, what's happened is the top down are in unison, and our systems are in place, and everybody knows what they should be expecting and what they should be getting from the staff, from coaches to support staff. And I think it's just the whole system is just really in sync right now, and it's really exciting.
Amazing, because one thing that has been echoed throughout this podcast, and on this podcast I've had people from obviously North America, people from Europe, people from the UK, obviously that being a part of Europe, but in the UK scene and throughout lots of scenes, surprisingly, and when I say scenes I mean regions as well, whether that's France or Spain or Europe. One thing that has been echoed is the lack of ability. So when someone gets put in as a head coach or takes a role as a coach in esports, their lack of ability to actually coach, the fundamentals of coaching, understanding, how do we structure practice? How do I get the best out of my players from a motivational standpoint? These are things that are often missed. And that's not to say that can never be learnt, therefore. Obviously, these things can be learnt by individuals. but is often overlooked. And let's just figure out who knows loads about the game, and we'll whack them in a call with the 5 players, or we'll whack them in a room with 5 players and see how it goes, you know. So it's amazing to see that not only have you guys sort of tackled that, which I think is wonderful in the structural standpoint, but also not just tackled it, like almost seem to have solved it in a way, you know. Obviously it's an ongoing project, but having somewhat of a solution to this issue is wonderful. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think what made it easier is, so we have Weldon, obviously, who was already known previously. Biofrost had worked with him at TSF,
Yeah.
And he was already somebody that was established and had a positive reputation and had the work experience to back it up. Whereas I don't know if somebody without that type of experience could have had the same success. I think now they can, now that Weldon has kind of trailed that path, if you will, where teams and players will say, oh, okay, well, maybe we should consider this. And maybe they won't. Maybe it'll still take some time. But it's always helpful when you can point and say, hey, they've done this, and it worked here. And so because Weldon, like I said, has led the way, I think it'll be easier for teams and players in general. And that's kind of always been the thing that I've noticed in all titles is every new title always starts with the same issues. I could tell you exactly what they are, and they always exist. And then in 2 years, a lot of them start to go away, and it's because players begin to trust management and the decisions because they've seen it before and they know what happens. And it just takes that one team to do it the right way, and then the management can say, hey, look at, see, I told you, they're doing it and it's working. And then players begin to get behind it. And so I think that I'd like to see that happen more in esports. I think it'll be good for esports in general and will become more competitive across the board.
Yeah, I guess it's like just basic pattern recognition, right? In terms of
how
you sort of not coerce, but convince someone that this is the right way to go about things. It's just seeing that it's worked before, as you say.
Yeah, and that was kind of the issue I had with substitutes. And I was pushing for that for a very, very, very long time. And C9 did it, and now they found success with it. And so now it makes it a lot easier. Fortunately, Walden already believed in substitutes, so I didn't have to fight that battle with him. But it makes it a lot easier now for LCS as a whole to sub players in and out, which historically wasn't something that had happened.
Right then, for those who were listening or watching, after reflecting on the recording, Trinity felt that this question was missing a couple of caveats, and certainly that there were some important things that we glazed over potentially, that were just passing through. Now the thoughts might have changed. Not changed, but there's a slight variation on it, or a caveat to say the least. So previously the question was to do with head coaches in esports, and this was the topic that you wanted to add to. So I'll sort of leave the floor to you, Trinity, to sort of take it away from there.
Cool, appreciate it. Yeah. So as we were talking about head coaches, obviously I had made the statement that said, there really aren't head coaches in the traditional sense as we understand it in traditional sports. And so as I had shared, I've spoken to my coaches about this and spoke on it at South by Southwest. And so the missing component here, and the reason why I had made that statement, was we don't provide in esports, we don't necessarily provide coaches with the same type of opportunities in terms of development that we do in traditional sports. So for example, I have friends that coach at the collegiate level in traditional sports, and what they've done is, they've coached through high school, they've coached at clubs, they usually get like volunteer positions in collegiate, they work their way up into the system to like an assistant coach, and then eventually become a head coach. And so there's years of philosophies, theories, and systems that they're gathering before they're eventually awarded the title of a head coach and given the opportunity to go out and recruit players and develop them. In esports, it's very different. We, similarly to players, we expect somebody to go from 0 to 100 very quickly, and it's a little unfair, if I'm being honest. So let's just make up a title. Let's just say Fortnite. So Fortnite comes out, about a year and a half ago now. Whatever it may be, and teams are putting together rosters, and you need a coach. So who are you going to assign as your coach, right? Like, this game is brand new. You have to bring, there's a variety of people that you can kind of choose from, whether it be somebody that just knows strategy, maybe somebody that's a little bit more of just traditional sports background, but is missing the ability to really help and develop the strategy side. And so, like I was saying before, it's just a little unfair that we are trying to assign these head coach titles, and I think fans and even organizations, to an extent, expect a certain caliber of coach to exist. And some people slot in very well and meet a lot of kind of these expectations. Some people kind of just struggle. But again, like I said, this is a conversation we've had internally, and all of our coaches are in different phases of their careers. Many of them have been now doing this for years and are very well developed. But again, you know, right out of the gate, sometimes coaches aren't really necessarily provided this level of opportunity that we would kind of see like in traditional sports. And the similar is true for players, right? They go from literally playing in their rooms to now being assigned to an organization representing sponsors, expected to be a certain level of professionalism. And it's just like a 0 to 100. And so I think esports as a whole is really behind in these areas, and it's more so of a reflection of an emerging space that doesn't have
Yeah.
its years of tradition that we see in traditional sports. And so it's just one of the things that exists, and we can't necessarily get around it. But what we can do, and what we do at CLG, is we help personal development and around coaching, so that way our coaches are elevating. And so yeah, I just wanted to add that piece of this, because I know this was a really important component as to why I said what I said,
Yeah.
but also to kind of share for those that kind of don't understand the inner workings in terms of like expectations, just kind of what that looks like as somebody who's trying to be a coach in the space, and just kind of the opportunities that exist.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I've spoken previously on the podcast about as well. Is like, if you look at traditional sports, me for example, I'm qualified through the LTA, which is the Lawn Tennis Association, which is essentially the governing body for all things tennis in England, in the UK, as far as I'm aware. Whereas in esports, there's no coaching qualification, no education for coaches. Say they want to get into League of Legends, how do you go about it? I guess you sort of just sit in your bedroom for X amount of time watching VOD reviews and things like that. So that's maybe a reflection as well, as there's no route to getting better and to improving yourself personally with the help of an organisation or a person. So maybe something to add there as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good point, because I use the example of Fortnite, and a lot younger than League of Legends, whereas we're seeing in League of Legends actually development of staff now, because it's been around a little bit longer. And a good example is our analyst. Our analyst is awesome. His name is Brandon, and he's been with us now. This is going to be his full second year. And essentially, where he started versus where he is right now, he's developed quite a bit. And even this past year, we've tapped into him, and Weldon and the different staff have said, hey, we want these different things in terms of reporting, maybe giving him additional responsibilities. And so he is learning on the job, and continues to develop. And so as the titles begin to develop and mature in terms of the player base and the way organizations are handling it, and the duration in which the title exists, I think we'll see this. But again, like when you have new games that pop up, like Apex, for example, right? Like, how do you find a coach there? And those become difficult for organizations.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really interesting point as well, and I think it's good to have that in there. I think it adds a lot of depth and a lot of value to the previous points that we were making as well. So I appreciate you giving the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on top of that, or is that sort of sums it up for you?
No, I think it pretty much hits it. So I appreciate taking the time here to revisit this and just kind of add that clarity, and hopefully that provides some insight for those that are listening in terms of kind of the development process and some of the struggles that we exist within the current ecosystem, but hopefully we will continue to get them better. And one of the things I would like to see is coaches going from one title to another. I think that could be interesting to see, especially like take BRs right now. It will probably be announced here shortly, but there'll be something that we're going to announce around that that will kind of speak a little bit onto this topic in terms of like transitioning staff across titles. And so, yeah, I think that could be something that more organizations begin to do, and I think some of them have to some extent.
Wonderful. Sounds super, super interesting. I'm glad that There was a little sneak peek there as well. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for your time, and we'll throw it back to the episode if that's cool with you.
Awesome, sounds good.
Awesome. Wonderful. Because you've mentioned a couple of times here as well about the fruits of the labour, and I think this is, the more I see organisations and the more I see people going for a long-term approach in a short-term world, you have this sort of slump, like a hump in terms of performance, and then this rise. So this is one of the things that CLG have found, right? Where potentially if you look more long-term and you look about, let's develop these players, let's get the infrastructure around them. This isn't something that you click your fingers and obviously we have all this success. It's like, oh, there we go, it worked. It's not like a week thing, a month thing. Maybe it's not even 2 splits. Maybe it's 2 years, something along those lines. And then obviously you guys, especially maybe not so much with the other teams, but more so in the League of Legends department, there was a slump that developed into this rejuvenation this season, that people were jaws were dropping in terms of fan reaction. People were they're doing so well, what is going on? Because if you look at tier lists and things like that, however much tier lists are a load of rubbish and not useful in the slightest, people would have put CLG slightly lower, especially with not having an idea of the background and the situations that go on behind the scenes. But as the director of esports, we've spoken about the infrastructure, but what is there other work, and if so, how much work has gone into this redemption arc as such?
Yeah, so I would say that the infrastructure obviously has been a large portion of it, but at the end of the day, our players are a huge part of this. If you put out a bunch of S5 players, then it doesn't matter how good your infrastructure is.
Of course.
And so while this conversation has been a lot about our staff, I think it's very important to recognize our players and what they're doing, and a little bit of pat on the back to the staff in terms of who we went out and recruited and why. But at the end of the day, our players are the heroes, and they are the ones that are going out there on stage and coming back from an 0-2 to win the 3rd place game, right? And so with that being said, I would say that a lot of this credit also deserves to go back to the players, because they are the ones that are buying into the systems and actually executing against it. Whereas it'd be very easy if players wanted to just kind of push against, and then all the things that we're trying to put in place just don't come to fruition. So with that being said, a lot of the players have bought in. And again, this comes back to Weldon already had a good reputation, already had the success. It makes it a lot easier. I had John Smith, who's never coached in League before, been Weldon with a different name. I don't know if the players buy into the same thing, right? Sure. So with that being said, a lot of credit goes back to the players. I know there's been a lot of hype around leaguE, specifically the split. He did go through kind of some of the natural rookie-ness that you would expect in the first split, and he too is buying into working with our staff and working on himself to bounce back and be the player that we always knew he was. And it's a large reason why I pushed Weldon. I said we need to really look at leaguE as we were going from 2018 to 2019. Because we saw a lot in the academy as to who he is and what he's capable of doing. And when Ray is clicking or leaguE's clicking and he's in his zone, he's amazing. He's great. He's a large reason why that team was able to get to the finals for academy. And I remember specifically in summer split, and I was talking to somebody at MSG, and I said, leaguE has it. I said exactly what he had in academy. I said it finally clicked, and I said he's there. And I was really excited. I think it was week 2, and I was like, leaguE's gonna be leaguE that we knew. And then sure enough, he'd done it. But going back to the original question is, he bought in. He was putting in the work and the effort to get where he knew he should be, and that's true across the board for our players.
Amazing, because it's not always easy, as you say, to buy into things like this, especially when one opinion that I've seen is, what does it matter how much sleep I get? What does it matter if I exercise? Or I'm playing League of Legends. Teach me how to be better at the game. And this is something that is hopefully, especially in the more professional end of full-time regional NA or EU. This is hopefully something that dies out, if it hasn't died out already, that sort of attitude. But again, as you say, the props definitely need to go to players, because it's something that you do need to accept and go with. And sort of not trust blindly, but trust enough to be right, let's give this a go. Let's see how this goes. So
yeah, it's kind of when I was in therapy, like my clients, the ones that, were finding success and they were overcoming whatever they were coming into originally to work with me. And they would say, "Thank you so much. You were so helpful. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And like, it would be all about me. And it's like, it's actually not about me. It's like, it's you. Like I could have the answers, but you need to
Yeah.
be the one that executes. And that's how I view our players as well, is like, we could have the answers and we can have the right infrastructure, but they have to be the one that goes out and actually acts against it.
Mm.
And that you have to create a culture and a system in place for that to happen. And proud of the staff here that we've been able to do that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because this is another thing, and we're going to move towards the more businessy sort of side, and potentially more your realm, away from that, if that's cool with you. Because one of the things that CLG has done is you guys put a lot of time into streamers. And you have a relatively large stream team as such. Obviously, LS being one of them, and Rush joining more recently after his time playing professionally in NA, now becoming a CLG streamer. I'm interested as to why this is something that CLG put so much care into, because obviously this is something that is more brand focused than success or trophy focused. So
Sure.
yeah, it's an interesting topic for me. So I'd like to get your take on that.
Yeah, sure. So, I think esports, or I don't think I know, esports is very much in a brand ambassador, content creator, really developing your brand and getting your brand in front of different individuals. And so our streamers, while we like to support them because of who they are and how they represent themselves, there's also the business aspect, which is, because we like them, they're a good representation of what CLG is. They can go out and also represent us as they are streaming. And so there's that component to it. We also have done historically some interesting content pieces with some of our streamers as well that want to be more involved. Yasuo did a piece with us as well. And so there's just like a lot of flexibility and opportunities that it provides. Plus, some people just really want to be with CLG, which we're not opposed to opposed to either, because of a variety of reasons, whatever it may be. But ultimately at the end of the day, leaguE, like with Rush and our different streamers, because they're well known and because we're obviously a competitor in that space, it makes a lot of sense for us to partner with these streamers. And we're excited to be working with them and support them however we can. And I would say on the streamer side, similarly to the players, like we try to provide value beyond our original commitment to each other, like beyond what the contract says, essentially. So if there's things that we can be doing for them because we are sponsored by Twitch and we have access to do things with Twitch, like that we will, whether it be like front page hosting or helping them like at TwitchCon and like doing different activations with us. So those are always good partner opportunities and exciting when the streamers want to kind of go beyond just what the contract says and work with us and tap into some of our resources.
Amazing. Because I guess it sort of links to this idea of giving back as well, a bit more fan engagement and letting people be closer to CLG than just, that's the team that I support and watch on my computer screen every Saturday, Sunday night, I presume it's Sunday night. Is it in America or is it sort of midday when you play?
So yeah, we play Saturday and Sunday. Well, I'm on the West Coast. If you go around the East Coast, sometimes you're watching night, which I knew, but when I was in New York for the World Cup for Fortnite, our game was the last game, and I think we started like at 9:00 on the East Coast PM, and I was like, "How do you guys watch this out here?" Like, it's like an hour before my bedtime. So, but we usually on the West Coast. It's usually during the days.
So that idea of being more than just that team on the screen, I think is something that you guys sort of tap into in a way. And linking this idea of fan engagement back to the stream team, in NA, for those who aren't aware or haven't heard of it before, there's something called a tailgate, and I believe that's the right terminology, where essentially organisations and brands can link up with people who are going to, whether it's, the perfect example here is Riot when they go and watch the games live, but these things I assume happen at events and loads of other locations as well. But it's essentially a way that the fans can link up with organisations and maybe bag some merch or go and meet some people in a way. But I'm interested because this is something that obviously doesn't necessarily always get the front of an organization's focus in terms of this. You know, we're focused on performance, we're focused on winning, I want to get a trophy. But how important is this specific example of a tailgate like this? And have you got any other further ideas or executions on future fan engagement for CLG?
Yeah, so we do tailgates at Riot. They provide that opportunity. We just did one at Detroit for the finals. We had like a snow cone truck, so fans could come up and get blue CLG snow cones. We had swag. There was all sorts of stuff that we were doing around fan engagement. At the same time, we also had a fan meet and greet too for the league players at Detroit. And then what we also do too is we have viewing parties, mainly in New York, for fans to come and have a fan experience with one another in person. And so typically it's kind of like a bar or like a restaurant that they'll rent out, and then we'll host parties there as well so that everybody can watch the games together. There's a lot of things that we're considering doing in LA. It's actually been a piece that we've discussed for, I would say, seriously for the past year. Now that we have the facility, there's a lot of creative ideas that have come across. It's really just finding the right timing and the right event, and not just doing it to do it, but to like do it in a very meaningful way. So yeah, fan engagement is really important. Obviously, a lot of fan engagement in this ecosystem is through online. While that's good and provides value, I think we would like to see a little bit more live events. We did a leaguE event actually at Madison Square Garden with our Fortnite team, where fans could come to MSG and they were able to play with the players and hang out and sign autographs. And then when we first had the partnership, we actually held a fan meet where many of our league players, some of the Smashers and some of the CSGO players were there as well, and to kind of meet. So it's something that we do and we consider, and it's definitely important to us. And so we're trying to always find new and creative ways that are meaningful to the fans. And the hard part with it is they're geolocated, whereas online in esports, it's a lot easier. So it's just one of those things. So I think we do a pretty good blend between East Coast and West Coast. It's maybe in the center of the United States. Because make some improvements.
Yeah, the interesting thing is like efficiency for me, and maybe this is going too far into the numbers sort of standpoint, but do you feel like these are efficient ways of connecting or potentially finding new fans or connecting with previous fans and old fans and that sort of process?
Yeah, definitely. So when I spoke at South by Southwest, I would say about 10 or 15 people come up to me like afterwards, and it was great and it was exciting. And I would say half of them said, new to esports, looking to find a team, didn't know much about you guys, but now that I understand your infrastructure and what you guys stand for and what you're trying to do and how you guys help players, they said, I'm a fan. And so it absolutely is important. And that's why I enjoy, our discussion here today is, just to continue to get the message out around who we are and what we do, as well as providing value to those that are looking to get into the space and to coach and just to kind of understand how we do it. We're not perfect, but I think we definitely are on a good trajectory and a good place, especially compared to some of our competitors.
Because it feels like knowledge for me, right? The more I speak to you guys from CLG, the more I'm like, damn, this organization is one that not necessarily as a team, whilst that is a reason, but as an organization I can be a fan of. Doing the right things and keep pushing out the infrastructure and making the tick boxes of the right exercises, This is something that progressively can make me more of a fan, So maybe it's just the knowledge and spreading the word, as you say, that's the most important. But that pretty much sums up all of the questions that I wanted to ask. There is one last question, and I always ask this to everyone that comes onto the podcast. And we have had a lot of different things in terms of an answer for this, and I'll go into what they are after I tell you what the question is. The last question is, what is one thing that you can teach me or the viewers from your world? Now, we've had little bits of, when I've had a Polish person on the podcast, they've taught me a bit of Polish. Don't ask, I can't remember it. That was 8 months ago. That's gone, unfortunately, for me. But there was Polish, there was marketing advice, there was just general quotes, book recommendations, anything like this. So does anything spring to mind in terms of how you could answer that question?
Yeah, I'll answer the question that I probably get asked the most.
essentially the same question. We just had some connection issues, so don't worry about that. But yeah, in terms of answering the question of what is that one thing that you can teach me or the viewers from your world, yeah, shoot from the hip, because that sounded like a really interesting topic up to that point.
Yeah, so the number one question I get is, how do I get into esports, or how did you get your job? And essentially what I would say is the best thing that you can possibly do is find out what your strengths are, be proficient, and have work experience that can demonstrate those proficiencies, and then sell against those to organizations. I would also say do not be hesitant to even provide pro bono work to demonstrate those skill sets to the potential employer at the time, just so that way you can get your name out there.
Yeah.
Because a piece of paper, a resume, and an email, while helpful and provides some value, there's nothing quite like seeing somebody actually work and their work ethic, and what it is that they can actually do, and being able to demonstrate that to an organization, I think provides a lot of value. We've had people do it. We've actually have had people end up working for us as a result of that, and so I know it goes a long way. But yeah, I would say like ultimately there's no crazy specific degree. It's just understanding what you do, and if there's a need in a specific organization that you can identify that need, then I would say reach out and push forward. It could even be everything from finance. It doesn't have to be coaching. It doesn't have to be on the competitive side.
Yeah.
There's just a lot right now, and organizations are becoming more and more professional each day and hiring more traditional jobs. So I would say that that's an area that I would really push for.
Yeah, and I guess it sort of links to the rapid growth of esports, because when you think about this, right, if you look at the sort of traditional sports versus esports world, traditional sports has been there for a lot longer than esports has, and this rapid growth is meaning that people are finding out, oh, actually we need that job title, or maybe we need to add this in there that we're missing out on, you know. So maybe that sort of links into that nicely, that if you're finding a gap and you've noticed that could work, being able to demonstrate that is obviously really important, right?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
Amazing. So that, as I said, that pretty much sums up all of the questions. So firstly, thank you ever so much for your time. This has been a really, really intriguing podcast for me, and I'm so happy that I can talk to people like yourself that aren't as front-facing. You know, you're not wiggly, and I think that's really, really nice to see that people like yourself would be so willing to chat about this. So I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast and giving up your time for that. So yeah. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, they want to get in contact with you, they want to see what you're up to, those sort of things, where is the best place that they can do that?
Awesome. Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram. It's a CLG Trinity with 3 I's, Triniti. A lot of I's. But yeah, and then obviously you can follow everything that we're doing on the CLG socials as well. But yeah, appreciate the time and having me on.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All of the links and all of the things that you just mentioned there will be in the description for the podcast. So if you're listening or watching, depending on if you're on YouTube or on any podcasting platforms, have a check out in the description and you will find all of those links. Thank you ever so much for everyone who has been listening. Thank you, of course, to Trinitiii for coming onto the podcast. I've really enjoyed this one and I hope you guys have too. So have a wonderful day and we will see you on the next show.